He was the one man Rome paid to stay away. For years, the most powerful empire on earth handed him gold, not to fight him, but simply to make him leave. And then, one night, at the very height of his power, with no army near him and no blade drawn, Attila the Hun was killed by a single drop of his own blood. This is the story of one of the smallest deaths in history, and the enormous thing it destroyed. Because when a single blood vessel burst inside him, it didn't just end a man, it erased an empire that had made the entire ancient world tremble. To see how, you first have to understand just how terrifying this one person had become. His name was Attila, and to the Christians who feared him, he had another, the Scourge of God, a punishment sent to humble a sinful world. From the year 4334, he ruled the Huns, a people of horsemen and archers who seemed to pour out of the endless grass of the East, faster and crueler than anything Rome had a word for. And he did something no barbarian was supposed to do. He made Rome pay him. The Eastern Empire, ruled from Constantinople, the richest city in the world, agreed to hand Attila hundreds of pounds of gold every single year, just to keep him on the far side of the river. The masters of the known world had become his tributaries, his debtors. The deal even had a name, the Treaty of Margus. The price of peace was 700 pounds of gold handed to Attila every single year. And whenever he decided that sum was no longer enough, he simply demanded more. And Rome paid. When the gold wasn't enough, he came anyway. In 451, he swept into Gaul with an enormous army, and only a desperate, last-minute alliance of Romans and Goths managed to stop him. On the Catalonian plains, the first battle in his life, he did not win. A year later, he turned on Italy itself, burned the great city of Aquileia to the ground, and marched south. The Pope himself, Leo, rode out to meet him on the road. And then, for reasons no one ever fully wrote down, Attila turned around and went home. He was not beaten. He was just planning more. So in the year 453, at the absolute summit of his power, Attila did what powerful men do. He took another wife, a young woman named Ildiko, and he threw a feast to match his empire. There was food, and there was plundered gold, and above all there was wine, rivers of it. The lord of 100 conquered peoples drank deep into the night, celebrating a marriage and, in his head, the campaigns still to come. Then he staggered off to his bed, and that is the last time anyone saw Attila the Hun alive. Next day, his guards waited. Morning passed into afternoon, and still no sound came from the king's chamber. Finally, uneasy, they broke down the door and found him lying on his back, dead. Beside him sat his young bride, her face turned down, weeping. There was no weapon, there was no cup of poison, and there was no wound anywhere on his body. What had killed the most feared man on earth was inside him. Sometime in the dark, a blood vessel had burst, a nosebleed, sudden and heavy. And because he was lying flat on his back, dead drunk, the blood had nowhere to drain. It ran the wrong way, filled his throat, and the conqueror of nations quietly drowned in it. The historian Jordanus recorded it in a single, chilling phrase: an effusion of blood, without any wound. The man behind that account, a Greek named Priscus, was no distant chronicler. Years earlier, he had travelled to Attila's court as a Roman envoy and dined in his very hall. He had watched this man drink. He knew exactly how the greatest warlord of the age had really died. quietly, in his sleep, with no enemy anywhere in the room. It was so absurd that many refused to believe it. Whispers spread that the bride had done it, that Rome had paid an assassin, that the great Attila could not possibly have been undone by a blocked nose. But the men closest to that night found no blade and no poison. The truth was smaller and far stranger than any murder. The man who terrified two empires had been killed by his own body on the single night he let his guard down. And here is where the tiny detail becomes the enormous event. Because Attila's empire was not truly an empire at all. It had no real cities, no written laws, no machine of government that could run without him. It was held together by one thing only: fear of Attila. Dozens of conquered tribes obeyed for one reason, that the alternative was him. Take away that single man, and underneath there was nothing. His sons should have understood this. Instead, Elak, Dengizic, and Ernak did the one thing that could destroy everything. They turned on each other. They began carving up their father's subject peoples between them like livestock in a will, each brother demanding his share. The terror that had bound the empire together was gone, and the sons replaced it with squabbling. The conquered peoples saw their chance. Led by a Germanic king named Ardaric, whose Gepids had marched under Attila for years, they rose in revolt. In 454, barely a year after that wedding feast, the Huns and their former subjects clashed at a river called Nedao. When it was over, Attila's eldest son lay dead on the field, and the spell of Hunnic invincibility was broken for good. One son held out longer than the rest. Dengizic fought on for another 14 years, still calling himself the king of a kingdom that no longer existed. In the year 469, the Romans finally killed him and carried his head into Constantinople, parading it through the streets. It was the last the empire would ever see of the House of Attila. After that, the collapse came almost fast enough to watch. The tribes scattered. The brothers were hunted down and killed, one by one. And within about 15 years of Attila's death, the empire that had made Rome pay tribute, that had burned cities and turned back popes, pierced the people from history in fire to amend that his crashes mime. Leave pain to it unstidorious. That unendeardlin who down with hoin gementes and turned back popes simply vanished from history, as though it had never existed. All of it undone in one drunken night by one burst vessel. Because sometimes the biggest picture in history hides inside the smallest detail.